So our next panel is called the Indie Book Scene. And the explosion and proliferation of photo books has led by many small and numerous independent photo book publishers. In some ways, the children of independent photo book publishers back in the day, like Lustrum Press, Nexus, Umbridge, the new generation of publishers like 10 by 10, TBW, SPQR Editions, KPG, Monolith, Daylight, Minor Matters, Red Hook Editions, have stepped in where larger publishers often won't tread. Add to this mix photographers' imprints like Many Voices Press, Matt, F8, Light Squared Media, and others. We have amazingly lively assortment of books being released, as we all know. It's not an easy road to hoe. I remember my first book in the era before computers and social media. I self-published a book called In the Fields with two other photographers, with an introduction by Paul Taylor, Dorothea Lange's husband, who actually still had an office here on campus. He's still alive. He had retired from teaching. His office was piled with stuff this high. It was pretty crazy. The three of us started a company. We got an NEA book grant. We begged the printer to let us pay half the cost of the printing, promising to pay the rest of the bill after we sold some of the books, and we actually did. I remember taking the books around to local bookshops, and we would take 4 or 5 copies on. They would take 4 or 5 copies on consignment, telling me to come back in a couple of months. Invariably, on my return, 1 copy was bent and unsellable, and 3 copies had been sold. So I got a check for the 3 copies that was going to be split between the 3 photographers, and I went out to my car. I had a parking ticket, which was about 10 times the amount of money I had just collected. So goes the independent publishing business. So this afternoon's panel, The Indie Book Scene, is moderated by Douglas Stockdale. Doug is an artist, photographer, book author, educator who creates narratives and stories that explore memory, aging, family, histories, and American culture. He's the influential editor and publisher of the Photo Book Journal, which is really fabulous, which reviews all these books that we're talking about. It's continually ranked the #1 for photo book reviews. He's also a submission reviewer for Lens Culture. He frequently curates and serves on juries for international photographic exhibitions and book competitions. He's a workshop leader, portfolio reviewer, discussion leader, and mentor for the Los Angeles Center of Photography. So welcome Doug and our panelists, Michelle Dunn Marsh and Kris Graves, who will be introduced by Doug. So thank you, Doug.
Okay, my turn.
And there you are.
All right.
Sometimes it works.
Super deal. And then play.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you so much. Part of what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a little bit of historical context as to where we are coming from and where we are today and why the indie book market is like it is. So I like to think of the fact that historically the 20th century was probably the land of the dinosaurs as it relates to photo book publishing. That is, this is the time where we had paste-up artists and blue lines. We had copy cameras, or how you do your separations for your black, white, and yellow, and magenta, of course. And then at that time, it was very expensive to be making the plates. And we weren't dealing with things like color management or soft proofing. And actually to hard proof a book meant putting it on press. So that became a very, very expensive task. So all of this in conjunction with the fact that you probably need to be on press, I think you heard that discussion earlier this morning, is that Tweak, the big, huge Heidelberg 4-color press, was problematic at best in terms of trying to get what you needed. And remember and think of is if you change the color for 1 page, you're really affecting 8. So it just became very, very complicated and complex in order to get the book looking like you wanted. Also, we can think of as the halftones at that time. If you look at, and we were just looking at a book even printed in the 1970s and 80s, you can just pick up the quality and just look at it and just know that this is just the quality of printing, that it's an older book. But because of the image resolution, but I think by far and far away is that the economics and what was going on for who controlled the photo book, who got published, who didn't get published, the inclusion or exclusion was pretty much controlled by a small group of people, relatively speaking. So that really, their influence and control of the channels influenced a lot of what we saw in terms of the photo books during this time. So then what all happened? Takes us to today. So now things are like have been put on top of its head in terms of things that we probably even now start to take for granted, but have occurred really only within the 21st century. That is, got to flip my own page, otherwise I'm not going to be able to follow along. Okay, sorry. So all in all, everything that I have listed here, and all of it should be pretty familiar. I think the bottom line is it changed the economics and ability in the marketplace for making smaller run books that got into niche markets. It just changed who was really the gatekeepers in controlling how books were published. It allowed people like even myself as a scientist now to self-publish my own books. So as an artist book, which was not feasible, I don't think, until the turn of the century. So with that, I don't think we need to spend much more time on that. It's all pretty self-inclusion. So let me provide introductions for Michelle and for Kris, and what I'm going to do to control and improve our timelines is I'm going to provide the introductions for both of those. Then I'm going to have Michelle go ahead and take the lead, and then Kris to follow. So let me introduce Michelle. First generation American, oh, I even got a slide for that. Well, let's do that. Well, there it is. This is who she is. Okay. So, very, very impressive resume, as you can read. She's currently conceived of, and now with Steve McIntyre, co-founded Minor Matters, which I think she will elaborate on as far as how books are published. Her background has been with Aperture, haven't we heard that earlier? And that small little non-independent Chronicle Books. They are independent.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Owned by the McAvoy family, by Diane McAvoy.
Okay, they're not independent of the McAvoys, but they are. They are an independent. Okay, and she's, I think, author of a really amazing book recently, Being Seen, A Personal History of Photography, and she writes it from the perspective of being what we might call a non-photographer, which brings her a different perspective on what all we're talking about. And also, The Kids' Contacts, a family memoir on writing your own way out of trouble. Very cool. And then an MS in publishing from Pace, and a BA from Bard. And so that's Michelle. For Kris, I have a slide for that too. Yay. So Kris hails from New York and California, runs two presses, which we're going to hear about, KGP, which stands for Kris Graves Press, or Projects, you betcha, and Monolith Editions, which he founded. And so there are Black-owned publishing houses dedicated to showcasing work from artists of color across mediums that address issues of race, identity, equality, gender, sexuality, and class. And he's produced over 90 publications. And last but not least, as almost as important for most photographers, he does not charge for your publication. So with that, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Douglas. It is a pleasure to be here to see many both familiar and unfamiliar faces. So thank you very much for inviting me. And let's see here. I will try to figure out how to get into our next slide. And while I'm doing that, I just want to say that Ken brought me to tears a little earlier, mentioning the names of two of my mentors, Michael Hoffman, who we'll only talk about offline, anyone who wants to know more about Michael, and Steve Barron, who hired me at Aperture. So it was very important to hear Steve's name said out loud this morning. So I am going to dive in here to tell you a little bit about Minor Matters, but I will start, because I know that there are students in the room, to say that actually when Steve hired me at Aperture, he said, you will never make a great deal of money in visual book publishing, but you'll have a lot of fun. And both of those things were true. But I created this graphic that I just thought I would share with you. So everything above the dotted line represents the cities that I lived and the institutions where I held full-time positions. Everything below the dotted line are all of the other companies that I simultaneously worked for over the last 27 years. So it is possible to make your way forward, but sometimes it takes some hustle. So don't ever give up, but know that you might be employed by more than one institution simultaneously. The image at the bottom of this next slide represents about 100 publications that I worked on as a book designer and or editor in the 17 years prior to starting Minor Matters. So as was mentioned, I was in various roles at the Aperture Foundation, but started as a book designer and then was editor of art and design at Chronicle Books. And those two institutions were really formative to what became the model for Minor Matters. The notion of collaboration in the creation of books, as often gets mentioned in these environments, I am not a photographer. I believe that all of you who make photographs need some fans like me who don't make pictures. And so my life in photography really came from books, not the other way around. And the craft of making books is something that I have been involved in and dedicated to really since I was a child. So when we develop visual books, predominantly but not exclusively photography, we do all of the same processes that would occur within a trade publishing environment. So we're really conceiving of what the book will be. We consider the artists that we work with are authors. So it's very rare that there is an author outside of the artist with any of our publications. We work closely with them on the edit, on the sequencing, the design, many of the things that Pablo was talking about. What's a little bit different in our business model is that we stop after the conceptualized period of time and then promote the book for a 3-month period of time online. If we can achieve pre-sales of 400 to 500 copies within a 3-month period, we then resume the production process and move the book into print. All of the people who participate in that pre-sales process are named within our books. We do have books here, so you can see examples of that. All of the books include names of the people who have purchased, who are a part of the publishing process with us. So not only do we believe in collaborating with our visual authors, we are collaborating with the public because we believe that's an important element to bringing people into the process and continue to have dinosaur-made visual books. I will just let that speak for itself. This is a photograph from an installation in January celebrating our 10th anniversary that shows we still do press proofs. Joan Lifton, who passed away in January, was an amazing photographer and editor, but she described me as a dinosaur, and I took that as a great compliment. Our publications really reflect the reproduction of art, the reproduction of what starts with an artwork made by many of you in the room. And so you see that there. We do press proofs if that is warranted, depending on the project, but we often do them. And so there was a wall of various sheets of our press proofs to arrive at our final publications. And yes, COVID notwithstanding, I do go on press for many of our books. I did not start out wanting to start a business. I had actually very little interest in that. What I did want was to own books that were not being made by a number of the institutions that I had relationships with, because the finances weren't really working. And this started between 2008, certainly post-recession, or just still during the recession at that period of time, into the early part of 2011, 2012, that it was getting very, very expensive to produce books. The books were not selling. This is not something we really like to talk about, but books were not selling as well. And as a result of that, publishers were less willing to invest the huge substantial costs in the production of books. And it was also a period of time where a lot of people were getting into self-publishing because print-on-demand technology was relatively new, created new opportunities. So I saw a lot of people who didn't know a great deal about publishing moving into it. And I thought, well, I actually do know something about publishing, so can I use that knowledge to try and find a way forward? Minor Matters evolved out of a great respect for Minor White, but also to represent a minority viewpoint and to try to bring my own inclinations, as well as those of people who were living in regions that were outside of kind of major metropolitan areas, underrepresented voices, to have an opportunity to see their books move forward also. So we've done a number of first books, sometimes with emerging artists, but also with artists who have 35 and 40-year careers that never resulted in a hardcover publication. And so that has been a really important and exciting component to add. These are just a couple of examples. India Beale was first in a book that we developed in 2016 called All Power, Visual Legacies of the Black Panther Party. We then went on to do, that became an exhibition 2 years after we did the book. And then India went on to do her monograph, her first monograph with us. This is Carbon by Charles Lindsay. These are cameraless drawings that were picked up at a museum bookstore and then licensed to be used within a building on Roosevelt Island. So again, just thinking about the ways that books do live in the world and carry work on that we sometimes don't always think about, but that is part of the value of a book being able to go out into the world. Nicholas Glannon's book, he's a Tlingit artist, and the book came out the year before he was included in the Whitney Biennial. This piece is by Nick also. This was an installation at Desert X in 2021. Ben, it's not 16 feet, but we did publish a 9.5-foot photograph, so comes close. So having done a graduate degree in the business of publishing, one of the most important things that I learned was the significance of actually transacting an exchange for a publication. And that's a huge part of what it went into the business model of Minor Matters. So we keep all of our books at, we have historically, this may be changing, but we've kept all of our books at a flat $50 retail. We aim to sell 400 to 500 copies, and we have thus far moved 26 books into print as a result of that, and reprinting 3 different titles. My business partner, Steve McIntyre, is a former student of mine, and he describes our business as a web and app developer. He describes our business in a very different way. I would typically just stop at, look at the art, look at the cool press proofs, look at the beautiful books. But he reminds me that one of the reasons that we've had the opportunity to continue is because we have tried and failed and tried and succeeded, and we continue to innovate and try new things. Starting in 2013, 2016 was the first time that we came very close to just ending everything, and thankfully we sold 400 copies in 3 weeks of the Black Panthers book in advance, so we did not have to close. And so that's just, again, a little bit of a snapshot of to some of the business decisions that go into small presses staying in business. And a selection, these are actually all female authors that we have engaged with. We have learned in the last couple of years that there is great interest in people wanting to publish their own books. And so we created a separate site that is a consultation to be able to give people feedback and guide them a little bit in the process of self-producing books. This is called Your Book Pitch. And we have 2 books that will be forthcoming this fall that completed their pre-sale cycle from November to February. And then Adrian Burrell's book, so a little shout out to a Bay Area artist that we will be working with. His book will launch for pre-sales along with a couple of other titles here in the next 2 months. Thank you very much.
27 seconds. I have like 14:33. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kris. I hope you all are having a great day today. Let's see if I can figure this out. This is the first time I've ever made a PowerPoint, I think. So, something new. I usually just show up with like a bunch of JPEGs and say, can you make the JPEGs work, please? Okay, my name is Kris Graves. I'm a I see something totally different. This is great. My name is Kris Graves. I'm a photographer and publisher based in New York, Queens specifically. I'm from Queens and have not really ever left except for college. I started KGP, or Kris Graves Projects, in 2009 as a gallery in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Right after the financial crash happened, my cousin quit his job at Goldman Sachs. And then he was like, I want to start my own little money thing or whatever. And I was like, yeah, whatever you want to do, I don't know. But he was like, but I want a space and I want to do something in the arts as well so I can run this thing from the back and you can run a gallery in the front. And so that kind of is how I got my first like gallery space while having a full-time job at the Guggenheim Museum and, pretty much doing the gallery. I mean, I was working 8 days a week. And after running that for about 2.5 years, I thought that it was like a terrible idea to run a gallery. I don't know if there's any gallerists in the crowd, but like, what a nightmare. And like just calling people to ask them to buy expensive prints was just not what I wanted to do with my like time. So I realized that, and plus none of my people could afford the work. So the only way I thought that could ever happen was for me to start making published projects that I could sell for 20, 30, 40 bucks. And then it's on you to decide if you want to actually not drink tonight to buy a book or not. So like, that's kind of how I thought of it. The first book we ever made was like this expensive ass book named Guardians of Solitude by a photographer named Laura McPhee. 16 by 20 inch pages. Yeah, it's that big. And we tried to sell 600 of these. I mean, we sold a lot, most of them. I still have these in this. If you ever come to New York, you can have one for free if you come to visit me. I'll tell you that. I still have like a nice big stack that I'm willing to let go of. But it was the first book I ever did, and it was a challenge because I didn't know how to make a book before this. I pretty much was at Strand and all the bookstores in New York City daily, researching the papers, presses. No one makes a 16 by 20 inch book, and I suggest you never do it. But if, because you would end up spending, I mean, we quoted it out before the financial crash. It was like $38,000 to make 600 copies, 200 with the slipcase, which is all right. But then after that crash happened, it was about $60,000 to do the same exact thing. So that's kind of like, that's the way I started in book making. The second book was an 8 by 10 inch soft cover book that I shared with a friend, and it was just like Queens, 20 pictures from Queens from each of us, and it was a way to like get it back down to a price where I could see actually moving some of them, really. So that was and this was the beginning of me like figuring out like, oh, do I want to make books with other people, or like kind of can I afford this? I mean, it's like such an expensive process. So the next 2 books I made, one on top is called Permanence. These are both my own books. One's Permanence and one's pretty much a story of Iceland named Discovered Missing. And I did 2 consecutive Kickstarters for these year after year to try to raise funds I just try to raise funds. And I was successful only in like the last day of these 30-day Kickstarters. Kickstarters are super stressful, by the way. Like, I don't know if you've ever done one, but very stressful stuff. So I would say like now I just do it on my website and hopefully make money that way because it's like just a little bit less stress. But I started my own publishing company with my own books so I wouldn't fail anybody else. That's pretty much how it started. And then like right after those 2, I did yet another Kickstarter to start the press with other artists. The first 3 books, one was by a Bay photographer named Jason Hanasik. He's from Virginia Beach, and he was photographing a boy going through the junior ROTC like Army program in Virginia Beach over the course of like 6 years. So it was like a growth of this kid going through this thing where he didn't really ever feel comfortable. So this was our first book called I Slowly Watched Him Disappear. This is a book named Winter's Berlin by yet another San Francisco-based photographer. I mean, it's crazy, actually, now I think about this. And he fell in love at first sight, and we went to Berlin in 2007. He fell in love at first sight with someone who he then moved to Berlin for 8 years. Now they live in San Francisco. But anyhow, I made this book of his 8 years in Berlin when he was done with Berlin, because as an American, you can't get a job in Berlin. That's how it goes. And our third book was Journey by Marilyn Rye, also a California-based artist who now lives in New York. And it was the first poetry and photography book that we did. I mean, it was like the first books we did. But it was kind of an interesting way to do it. Like, poetry has been something that we keep going with because there's like this, a lot of photographers have some poetry inside of them, I think, and we want to support that as much as possible. We also wanted to keep our books low cost. So in the next few years, I mean, I've always made my own books. Like, Top Left is my own, and we've also produced small books for other people. Usually we try to keep costs down because no one pays for the books to be made. Like, the artists don't have to come out of pocket at all. They just have to find a certain percentage of the pre-orders for each book so that we can kind of support the rest of it and make the book and get it out into the world. So yeah, we work with artists. We hope to work with some artists over and over again. Like, we work with this dude, Greg Evans, who's made this series named Setting Sun. So we've done it 4 consecutive years. It's now been since COVID that we made one of these, but these are cool little pamphlet style books. Making my own projects as well, like always making my own thing. I don't know what my time is. I have no idea. Oh, I can see it. Okay, never mind. So we just kept it moving. I mean, like, for the most part, we just kept it growing. Like, made about we as in me and the artist. We're the only people making these books. All these books were kind of designed by me, pretty much, because I couldn't afford. There's 2 or 3 books here that weren't designed by me, just because the artist came in with their own designer. But for the most part, we have no money, so we were just trying to do it all myself. And I'm good at sequencing, and I'm really bad at design. Not really bad, just super simple. So now we work with a designer, but we'll get to that in a minute. One of the biggest projects a big project that we've done over the years is called Lost, and this is Lost 1 set, and this was, I think, 2018, and this was 10 photographers photographing 10 cities across the world. It was places that they are from. Like, so we had some good photographers here. Like, I mean, we had like Laura McPhee again, photographing Calcutta. That was like the middle picture on top. We've worked with Lynn Seville, who photographs New York only from like dusk till dawn. Never a daytime shot ever in her whole career for like 40 years. Pretty awesome. A guy named Andreas Gerke, not Gursky, but from Berlin. I put my own book in here from Queens, and we had Zora Murph, I think I said it. But anyhow, we had some really great photographers. Lois Connor worked with. I pretty much emailed people and said, hey, would you like to make a little book with me, about 25, 30 images? And they said yes, and that's how we did it. I mean, it was kind of like we make edition of 200 of these books. They weren't very expensive. Usually the books we make are under $10 a copy, and hopefully less than that, so we can actually make a profit at some point. The second set of this was 20 photographers photographing 20 places that they're with around the world the next year. So in that course of that 2 years, I made about 35, well, probably like 40, about 33 books in 2 years. It was a lot. Actually, I made 28 books that year because we had 20 plus 8 more. So we did 28 books in 2018 before COVID, 2019. And then 2020, COVID hit, and we still made 13 more during COVID. But then, that's pretty much like the progression of it was like work. Pretty much I choose artists to work with if they want to work with me first off, and because they're better than me. That's how I choose. Like if I see art that is just like, oh my God, I wish I did that, or like I feel envious, was envy the right word? I don't know what it is. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah. I wish I made that work. So that's kind of why I want to make the book with them. That's the basis of my publishing company, pretty much. COVID hits, things change. The books that were popular before have instantly become unpopular, meaning there's just a lot of work that the world was willing to look at before COVID, and now that has changed, right? So we're trying to work with that change. Of course, when you're going into it, you've already have these projects that were before, so you're working with those. But we after COVID, we really took a look or I took a look back at what we did produce and wanted to change that up a little bit so that it was more about the problems of the world. But still beautiful photographs that where you'd have to still think about, like, what am I looking at? But, like, not obvious, but working with issues of, you know, like forgotten histories. Like this book on the bottom is called Electronic Landscapes. And they're photographs from Detroit's techno scene, since techno started in Detroit, and this has kind of been lost amongst the world. And pretty much these two guys, Edward Hillel and Isaac Diggs, went out to Detroit for 5 years and photographed the people that made the techno scene happen, the landscapes of the techno scene, and the studios where the music was being made. And we made this enormous, like 11 by 11 and a half by 13 inch, but I wish I had this here, but I don't. It's huge. Anyway, so we're working with culture in a different way after the pandemic. And then I started a company named Monolith Editions that's separate from KGP, and Monolith is devoted to not only photography, but people of color in all artistic disciplines. It's still pretty new. We've only made about 6 or 7 books with Monolith, but these are our first books here. I didn't really name the people in these, or like the artists, because you should just look at my website if you want to get the information. But we've had a good time with this. And, you know, pre-COVID, we were like making editions of like 300 books max for the most part, and that was good enough. And now I'm realizing that we need to make more books, because now I'm selling out a little bit too quickly on the projects, which is good and bad, because now I have to like actually pay more to make the projects anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, so how long am I supposed to be here? Is this like a 10-minute thing, or like yeah, you're counting for me. I love it. And the last books this year that I'll talk about really quickly before we get to a conversation is, like, we made a book with a photographer. It's on the table outside, named Stranger Fruit, and it's a book by John Henry, and within our black mothers holding their play dead black sons. And it's pretty much like taken across America, about 26 or 27 states, 60 mothers, or 58 mothers. And it's a pretty amazing it's an amazing book. And it took a lot to make it, and it took a long time, but it looks really cool. So you should check it out. The one out there is kind of a sold out first edition, and we're making a second printing of it now and changing, you know, the gold becomes, we want the whole book to be purple this time. We're going to add a ribbon, so we're going to do all that. But like, think about, like, this is the thing. Like, we made 600 of these. Probably cost me, I think, about 12 grand to make 600 copies of this book. It'll cost me 12 grand to make 1,000 copies of this book. So that is my error, right? Maybe I should have made 1,000 the first time. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So that's out on the table. You can check that out. Also, Amy Elkin's book is out there, which is Amy is a Bay Area. Well, she's in the Bay now. She just got out of Stanford. Congratulations, Amy, if you're here somewhere. And she photographed, she made a self-portrait every day during all of COVID for 377 consecutive days until she got a vaccine. So these are the cyanotypes she made daily in this big book, a thick, tiny book. We made this book 5 by 6.5 inches because the press sheet allowed us to put 32 pages up. So it's 64 pages in one. So the book's like 400 plus pages. It still costs a fortune, but it's cool. It's a really cool book. And this year we're starting to collaborate with museums to make publications for shows. So I was on the advisory board for this Museum of the City of New York show named New York Now. And this is called Home, this book series. And pretty much within 3 weeks, they asked us to make and design. Now I work with a publisher. From that COVID sign, after I work with a awesome designer named Luminosity Lab, dude named Caleb, who probably some of you guys have met. He does all of my design work, and I don't have to do it anymore, which is fantastic. And he's good. He's actually really good at it. So I'll never do it again. As long as he is my dude, I'll never do it again. But yeah, so we made these like 4 pamphlet style that fit into a slip case. They're all 16 or 20 pages. And yeah, if you want to know the process on any of these things, we can definitely talk that through too, because I have all these numbers in my head, and I can price your book out if you give me the specs for sure. And then last but not least, I'm making my own book again this year. It's called Privileged Mediocrity, and it's a bunch of years in the making, and it's pretty much racist landscapes in America with a bit of portraiture stuck in there. So that's that. If you ever want to buy anything online, there's stuff out there that's pretty cheaper than online, but if you want to look on my website, for the rest of the weekends, if you just type in Berkeley 35 as a code, then you'll get 35% off. But yeah, so cool. Let's talk. What do I do with this? Just leave this on? Like, how do I?
for the audience, too, so we can see who you are? I'm blind right now. Okay. Yeah, that's what I say. Just if we can turn up the house lights, please. Well, anyhow, we're open for questions. Whoever's out there, if you're raising your hand, we'll guess that you're... Oh, there we go. Now we can see you. This makes it much easier. All right. So who's got a question? Right here in the
Could you
center.
talk a little bit about distribution? Both of you, in terms of how you distribute your books and what you think is effective, that sort of thing?
Yes. We do not sell any of our books on Amazon. We manage our own distribution. So right now we sell through about 60 retailers. We sell to independent bookstores, museum stores, international stores and boutiques. So Marc Jacobs, for instance. So that is a lot of work, but is not impossible to do. And again, I say that bearing in mind that I have worked in publishing for a long time, so I already had terms set of how to work with stores. But we also sell directly through our website. So we don't sell during the pre-sales process. We only sell directly to the public, and then once a book has gone into print, then we distribute through retailers.
You use a distributor?
We do not use a distributor. We manage our own distribution. We have a warehouse that does all of the preparation, so everything is boxed up and ready to go. But we manage our own distribution.
I like to have all the money myself, so I don't distribute either. And we exist in about 4 or 5 stores, like Printed Matter, Photo Eye, and a few other small bookstores. But besides that, we're selling literally everything on my own website, so that I can mark who gets it. For my press, it's more about we want museums and institutions to buy, and I can't track it from stores, but I can track who buys it if a museum buys it on my website. So I'd rather have the information for the next books. And plus, we only make 300 to 500 copies of a book, so we'd like to sell it ourselves. I don't know if the artist really likes that very much, but I think it's it is what it is.
There's a question here. I think there's 2 of them in the middle. Thank you.
Hi. Could you speak to a little bit about how you collaborate with artists? And so you spoke to that about reaching out to artists. I'm specifically interested when artists reach out to you, what you want to hear and see, and how you work with them if they're reaching out to you specifically.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm open for submissions always. I mean, you can email me anytime if you have a project that you'd like for me to look at. I'll look at it and I will try to respond to you in a timely manner. I think, and I'll be honest. I'll be like, if we want to work with you, then I'll let you know pretty right away, kind of. I mean, if it's awesome, if the work is awesome and we think we can actually sell it, then we'd want to work with you. But besides that, yeah, we get a lot of submissions, and usually people are submitting work that's not really complete for books yet. I mean, anyway. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I don't know how to say this in nice ways. There's a lot of bad work in the world, and you get a lot of good submissions and a lot of bad submissions, and then you have to choose from the ones that actually, because a submission is half the not even half. It's if you give me 30 images, I need to see 1,000. If you can send me 500 images, then that's way better than seeing 30. So because I don't trust anyone's sequencing of their own projects. So I would need to see more. That would be the first bet. If it was even interesting in the first 30, then I need to see way more. And that's how I'd work with an artist starting off.
We don't take open submissions. We never have. And with that clearly stated on our website, we got 5 to 7 a week. And we started Book Pitch when, in 2019, I was at a book fair, art fair, can't remember which, probably an art fair. And people spent more time wanting to show me their own photographs on their phones than looking at the books that we had paid to be in front of them to try and sell. And after just being annoyed, I was like, okay, well, maybe I should start taking $150 and looking at their phones, because I have to pay for this table somehow, and they're not really buying books. So we started Book Pitch because there was a real need. People wanted feedback. But as somebody, again, who's been in publishing, I've read slush piles. That's what we call it internally in publishing. It's called a slush pile. That's an unsolicited submission. Not all publishers still take them. Aperture's, actually, the Perry Photo Book Prize emerged out of what used to be a slush pile. And the goal of that for many publishers, as it was for Aperture, was an opportunity to give people real feedback. Because when you're just looking at a pile of work and sending someone back a letter that says, thank you, no thank you, no one really grows from that. And so we developed Book Pitch to be able to give people real feedback. Like, yes, this could become a book, and 80% of the publishers out there, 85, 95, I'll let Douglas answer that one, are going to ask for a subvention of $30,000 to $50,000 in order to publish this book. That's not information that everyone has, and so giving people that information feels important. To be able to say to someone, this is a lovely idea, you should self-produce it, and here's about what it will cost you, and here's the kinds of people you might want to hire to work with you, and here's about how long that's probably going to take you. So there's a flat fee of $250, but we felt at least that way people could submit work, show us their work, but we were then giving something back that gives you some real direction.
So,
Thank you. I think there was a...
I have a question. So what do you think about blurb books? And for somebody who wants to create their own book or create a sequence and something to show one of you?
I think print-on-demand technology is one of the most exciting things that has happened in our field. It seems the logical, to me, it seems the logical third technological revolution from desktop publishing in the 80s to digital photography in the early 2000s to print-on-demand technology that really started to emerge in the late 2000s. That being said, it's causing the same consternation and excitement that all of those previous technological changes created for people. So if you're a graphic designer who used to be paid really well and now anyone can set their own typography, that affected some people's livelihoods and it created other people's livelihoods. The same thing happened in photography when digital photography really took off. So I think the technology exists and can be utilized in some really, really interesting ways. I like ink on paper, and I can't get repeatability of quality using print on demand the way that I can with offset. And so I have been approaching print on demand companies to try and get some research and development time with them to say, give me the opportunity to tell you how to make these books better so that we can make use of them. But the reality is that their business model, this is a direct quote, I'm not going to say the company, you already said it. Good enough is usually good enough. And that's not how I go about making books. But it works for a lot of circumstances. And the family book that I published, The Kid Contracts, is only available for sale on Blurb for anyone who wants to know how I ended up the insane, brilliant person that I am.
I think that it's just too inconsistent for me to trust it. I mean, like, if you print two books at two different times, they'll be printed in different states from Blurb, and they'll have different color. So for me, all that is like off the bat, never going to happen. And I mean, if you have if you have a cover design, you may not get what you want in the right way, and then it's like, what do? You have to get another. You can't return it. Yeah, it's not returnable. I mean, I was putting these little like letters in the middle of the spine for Blurb books, and they'd never be in the middle. 5 books, different books, never in the middle, and that's just like that. I can't do it.
I guess the good thing about that is you can print one book and see if you like it, and then...
But if you print it again, that will be the one that's green or like magenta. And then you're like, okay, well, I should have printed 5 the first time. So for me, it's more like, I'd rather make an 8 by 10 inch book from a press that I can contact, make 100 copies of that, charge, give them, $12 to $15 a copy, which I guess is $3,000, right? If 100 copies would be like $1,500, $2,000 with shipping or something like that. If it's going to cost me $2,000 to make 100 books, let's say it's 64 pages. If I sell 10 books with a print at $100, that's $1,000. If I sell 20 more at $40, that's $800. I have $1,800, and I only need $2,000 to make 100 books. I have 80 to sell for profit, or 70 to sell for full profit. So in my mind, numbers work for me to just make it myself and try to sell 50 books.
And I think a big difference in that, which we've talked a little bit about too, is are you approaching this as a business or are you approaching it as a creative practice? Because if you're approaching the process of creating a book as a creative practice, the ability to make 5 of anything, even if 3 of them are in the alignment that you aim for, is not something you could do before. And you can do that now. And once you get to know the technology, I mean, we published an essay book that is printed through Blurb. It's print on demand, the book that we did with Charlie Harbit. I didn't want any pictures in the book. I wanted it to just be words. Charlie's wife, Joan, said Charlie would never publish a book without photographs. And therefore, there must be photographs. And when I got all hot and bothered about the photographs not looking good, Joan looked me in the eye and said, Michelle, he published in newspapers. Get over yourself. And so I think sometimes we have to also remember that, you know, there are different spaces that images have lived in, that photographs have lived in. And if that's right for your project, fantastic. You know, and those pictures actually look pretty darn good. They're cream paper, they're halftones. We chose images that would not suffer if they were not really well reproduced. And they do what they need to do, which is give someone an example of Charlie Harbit's photographs.
So my secret sauce with Blurb is that you can use their free template software to design something, and for $4.95 you can make a low-resolution PDF that you can then send to a publisher that they would get an idea of what your book dummy looks like. So that $4.95 for a PDF for me is just golden in terms of their secret sauce.
And you can also do it for if you have Lightroom. You can you go to Lightroom in the book section and export the PDF or export straight to Blurb.
Are there local publishers that we should consider?
Local publishers. You mean local, not printers, but local publishers? Printers? Well, there's a lot. I mean, and local's relative, right? I mean, I make books in Montreal with a press named Graphiscan if I need something quick. And there's a press in New Jersey named Hatteras that I make oversized. Like, if I want it to be a staple bound 16 by 20 inch open, then I'll make it there because I can pick it up in a car. But I usually go to Montreal to make soft cover digital products.
We print, right now we've been printing mostly in Barcelona through a printer that Kris had worked with. We printed for 5 years in Iceland. They have very, very high environmental standards and are very careful about what they bring into the country and are very energy efficient. So I was very sad when they closed because they had a printer and bindery in-house. We have printed, the carbon book was printed in Pennsylvania. The accordion fold book was printed in Vancouver. So, and the 4-color work we have printed in China. I don't print in China very often. But if the project demands the right kind of vibrant color, Chinese printers are very good at that.
The only thing I'd like to add is having worked in a lot of discussions with photographers who have self-published, is if you're going to go to a printer, find out if they've printed a book before. The pagination and how the paper lies and folds and goes to the bindery is a bit of an art still. Still some dinosaurs out there, thank God. But if you're going to go to a printer, find out what they've done before. Find out who the bindery is, because more times than not, the printer is not going to be doing the bindery. So find out who the bindery is as well, so that they get the complete package. And for my rule of thumb is have the printer coordinate the bindery if you're not going to be able to be on site for the bindery, because if they've worked with them and they've done enough titles, they know how to work with how to get what they print into a final book and a hardcover.
I'm also going to suggest you just work with a publisher. I mean,
There was a behind you. Well, there's also a question down here, too. Let's get her first.
Get who first? Right.
Her first, please.
You mentioned that there were some books that worked pre-COVID and that didn't work after. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more to how COVID changed.
Get me in trouble. It's great.
Things.
No, I think that for me, I rather make books that are challenging social norms at this point than just books that are about like pure landscape or ideas that don't concern that don't have social concern. I guess is what I don't want to keep producing. I want things to actually like challenge. So simple. That's as simple as it gets for me.
We actually found that most, not all projects that have matters of social justice in mind. One of my favorite books that has never happened, or it has to do with youth incarceration, couldn't move it across the table. Projects on wildfires in California in 2016, couldn't move it across the table. On the other hand, the Black Panthers book did go forward, and so it's actually interesting that the projects that the only authors we have been unable to publish consistently are straight white men. But you know what? They're being published by a lot of other people. So if we can't move those books forward, that's okay. We're going to keep trying because we publish to my sense of the demographics of the United States of America. So every other book should be by someone who identifies as a female. Every fourth book should be by someone who's not entirely Caucasian.
So I have a separate question from all these more relevant issues. How do you address the question of model releases from subjects that have been photographed indoors that would appear in an artist's collection?
That's a really good question. We, in our agreements, you as the artist are responsible. So we put all of the onus back on you because I worked on a number of projects where the publisher took on clearance of rights, and you kind of have to have a team to do that. I double-checked those things. We published a book called Riding Through Compton, where all of the photographs were of underage people, and I did ask for copies of the model releases from the photographer as a legal protection before that book went forward. Many people will take it as a kind of an honor system. If I get sued, I'm going to pull out the contract that says they sue you. But really, legally, we as the publishers are the ones who are liable.
Yeah, I've almost gotten in trouble with that. But I still don't take model releases. It's just too much work. We try not to work with. Well, I guess if we needed to, we'd get it. But for now, we're okay with the risk, I guess. But
is it stated in your agreement?
Yeah, it's not like I shouldn't be liable, I guess. But it is what it is. I mean, whoever's getting sued is getting sued. You can't it doesn't really matter.
Even if you have as a publisher, even if you have a contract that says that it's the photographer's responsibility, technically the publisher is who is making that information public. So you as a photographer always have the right to exhibit that work. It's the act of reproduction that can become sticky, and we are the ones then responsible for reproducing. So technically it's always going to come back on the publisher.
I think it gets more complicated with marketing the images. Like if you start to market, if you're making a book, let's say with like if you made Richard Rinaldi's book, I guess, with bunch of kids, touching strangers. I mean, this seems like a nightmare of rights, right? For me, it just seems like, oh, you're having just random people touch kids in public. This is not. So I would say that that is where you'd probably want to see some paperwork, for sure.
Richard had model releases for that book.
Oh, I'm sure he did. I mean, and then you if you're gonna put it on a bus, we put those on a bus. I put those pictures on bus stations around Miami, 30 of those images, and no one got sued. But still, we didn't use the ones where it was particularly a person underage. like on those bus ads. They just were taken in public anyway, so it's kind of like it's a fair game. I mean, you're on a sidewalk, so it's kind of fair game.
And things for the U.S. are also different than Europe and Asia, so there's that complication as well.
We also, as a backup, do print things like, for instance, in the hip hop book where I didn't have model releases or permission, and the photographer, it was very much a trust agreement where we said in the book, essentially, efforts have been made to obtain the rights. If anyone has a problem, contact us.
And then what?
Nobody contacted us. I mean, I think some of it has to do with the respect of how you treat the work. A lot of it has to do with the trust you engage with the photographer. And if that person has trusting relationships with the people that they've photographed. I mean, I worked with Jim Marshall, so it's all about trust. And in those circumstances, you have to know that the person that you're working with has done their job, and you're taking a risk potentially, but you're taking a risk. But if it's worth it, then you take the risk. I mean, publishing is a risk. It is a gamble. We wouldn't be here if we didn't all enjoy a little bit of gambling.
I'm not an attorney, but the thing that I've also been made aware of is if a work is an artistic work, that's one thing, but if it's commercial and you're going to try to say, I'm going to sell Nikes or Coca-Cola or something else that's branded and put that as an advertisement in a magazine, that transcends a lot of what we're doing.
Totally. That would be, you need a model release for that, for sure.
Yeah, just take logos off of everything.
Well, that would be a question of having photographed people at work in their offices, and but it wouldn't be apparent whose office it was. It was just a person in an office, and there's no names. So, but I took the picture, but then I didn't ask the person, and it was.
That seems fine.
I thought
You'll
so,
be fine.
but.
I feel like you just do what you want until you get in trouble. It's like how it
Yeah,
works.
well, you know, you might lose more than you gain, and I'm just, you know. It isn't. Well, maybe. Okay, thank you for your time.
Yeah, I guess the other thing too is it's where the location is. If you have a tripod in Disneyland, you're going to have 3 security guards on you so fast. But if you're hand-holding the camera, you're probably not going to have much of an issue. And there's a lot of private places that don't like you to do that, but public places like on the beach, it's pretty much, as Kris says, fair game.
Yeah.
So, but can you publish pictures that you made in Disneyland?
Absolutely not.
Not if it says
No
Disney.
way. I was photographing at Disneyland last year for like a week, and with Disney saying it was okay, and it was still not okay. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of like, can I make a photograph here? Like, nah, this is not a part of the park where you could make a photograph. Like, that kind of stuff is still happening. They're guiding you around with 4 people, and I'm trying to make photographs with like 4 people telling me like, you know, don't include that, you know, all that kind of stuff. So.
When copyright law in the United States changes because of Mickey Mouse, you know not to mess with Disney. I am going to call out 5 students who I asked to ask a question, and I have not seen a single one of them ask a question yet.
I was waiting for the mic.
Here you go.
You gotta give up your mic.
You can just scream your question. People can hear you.
Michelle, this question's for you. If you could talk about just the role that female publishers play in the industry.
Hey, thanks. I did forget to address that, so thank you for remembering to ask. I was simultaneously serving as an executive director and publisher of Minor Matters, and realized that there were a number of female executive directors, which I was very happy to see, and there were very few female publishers. To be in a business position and be making business decisions in addition to creative decisions felt really important. And that was a really eye-opening moment, because I want women to see women in those positions so that they know that there is space for them. I want Black and brown people to see Black and brown people in those positions so that they know that there is space for them, that these are pathways, and that if the people at the top of the food chain have different viewpoints, it's going to affect everything that comes from that. From the quality of printing, of skin tone, to the kind of paper that something is printed on, to a use of language. We have to change. We have to change things up on all fronts. And so while it is hard and scary to run the business, it also feels very important. Thank you.
And where's the other student that has a question? Oh, they all ran out of the room. Why did that happen? Okay, here in the center.
How do you go about integrating writers into the project? If someone wants to bring a writer in, or you prefer to go after a writer, how does that play out?
I would like the artist to choose the writer. For the most part, a lot of artists will have a person in mind already. If they haven't written it already, then I'll say, look, we can come up with a budget for that writer and make it. Everyone gets paid. I mean, to do the work in some way. So I really want them to figure out who is best for their book, and I really don't want that writer to then write about the artist. That would be the worst. I want them to actually write about a subject that the book is about, not about the artist themselves, which is more complicated than you think.
I am a huge fan of Nancy Newhall's Third Medium. So the idea that photographs and text together become their own third thing. And my own background comes out of writing. So we think a lot about the text component. Sometimes, like in one of the books that we just published with Rachel Demme, she actually was a great writer, and so we, rather than turning to someone else, we included her writing in the book. But we often are thinking about writers. Sometimes the artist will have someone in mind. Sometimes I will have someone in mind. Sometimes we come up with what will be the right contribution together. In Nicholas Galanon's book, in the Accordion Fold book, it was really important that there be context for that work. So there are contemporary Indigenous voices. Every way that you open the book, you hit a text so that you never see the piece without context for it. And then in other cases, the text may be very brief. So Eric Johnson's Pine, which comes with an LP, in that case, the photographer really wanted music to accompany the images. But there are some very brief texts that are included as well. So Sankalsa's book, Ed Ruscha had written a brief piece about water in the desert that we obtained the rights to in order to include it. So it really varies. Sometimes the photographer will have someone in mind, or the artist will have someone in mind. Sometimes we have people in mind, but they are paid for their for their engagement. Like Kris, we don't charge photographers. And in fact, we limit how many copies they can even buy, because we give them copies of the book. It feels really important that we enter into these things as mutual investments. But graphic design for me is a service. People can pay me to be a graphic designer, but I don't see publishing that way.
Got time for one more question. Okay, yep, you got your hand up. Stand up and tell us.
So I'm just curious, the finances of book publishing. It sounds like in some ways there's no money, but it sounds like if you want to publish your own book, you have to come up with $30,000 to $50,000 to do it. But you guys are doing it. So are you guys actually just cutting enough out of each sale that you're making it profitable enough to continue?
Profit is like an illusion to me. I don't even know what I mean, like, there's some books that will make money. I mean, like, but most books will not. So it's like for the press. I mean, I have day jobs. I'll just say that much. Yeah, no, like, you can't just be a publisher. I mean, I don't think anybody can just be. I mean, maybe someone can just be a publisher, but I don't think Stockdale is just a publisher. So it's like not
He's
even.
a printer, in addition to being a publisher.
Yeah. I mean, like, he's probably doing Louis Vuitton ads or something like that. But anyhow, I would say that like I think that 30,000 cost, like that minimum, was some sort of maximum 10 years ago. Now it's a minimum for some reason. But like a lot of sharks will ask you for $30,000 to make a book. They'll make the book in China, 1,000 copies for 12 grand, 5 grand, 8 grand. And then they give you 100 copies of it. Congratulations, you have 100 copies and you've out $30,000. And then they'll do mediocre work trying to sell the book to the right people. They give it to a bunch of stores that will never sell it. And I mean, it's just like, for me, it's like, the whole thing sounds crazy to me. And I know a lot of people that have gone through this process and paid the money to have the book, and then after the fact, they're like, well, that was cool. I'm glad I have this book, but like, there's some problems with the book. I never got really much from this. My career didn't really grow from this book. Like, so for me, it's like, you might as well just like do it yourself for like a few $1,000s, making your own little book. I mean, hell, you can. I don't know. I have a lot of.
We agree on some of that, and we disagree on other elements. Minor Matters is my primary job right now, and has been for the last 3 years. It covers about 50% of what I need to live, and that's good. That's better than 0%. But a huge part of that came out of Kris from Nazreli, who is a friend and colleague, saying to me when 5 years in, I was like, wow, a lot of people used to pay me money to design books, and now I pay myself nothing to design my own books that I'm publishing. Like, somehow this doesn't quite seem right. And he said, you need to get less precious and make more money, because if you don't stay in business because you don't figure the business side out, you're doing us all a disservice. And I took his words very seriously. It's not easy, but I build a P&L. I mean, we build some money in, and our books don't go forward if we haven't hit that minimum benchmark of sales. And we print more than that. And so, we build in a little bit of money to each book, but we've been in business for 10 years and we built up a backlist, right? So every time those books continue to sell, Sarah knows this. She's learning all about backlist. Deanne Arbus's book has sold many copies at Aperture, and that funds many, many other things. So that's part of the business of publishing. Yeah. Thank you all so much. We're going to get